We are back again with On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMAPlay365. I'm your host Newsome, and we're here again at the Apex in Vegas for UFC Vegas 13. We should have been looking at a number one contender fight for the light heavyweight title in this main event as the UFC continues to rebook Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira, which seemingly keeps getting pushed back due to COVID-19 and injuries. However, Dana White did say he is looking to book Jan Blachowicz against Israel Adesanya, so if that's true, this main event no longer holds as much importance because by the time one of the ranked light heavyweight fighters gets to the title shot, all the other killers in the division will be in the mix too. But just before we get into the breakdowns, last Saturday was a decent event for MMAPlay365 across the board. The dog of the week unfortunately dropped with Andrei, who was also an official bet too, but we made very slight profit on the night with the official bets. 9 out of the 11 parlay pieces won in the Fun Gamblers section, and one of the pre-made parlays in the Fun Gamblers section won too. And if Bobby Green had have won, then both of the pre-made parlays would have won too. But that's the fight game. Remember, we have multiple packages on the MMAPlay365 website for all the UFC betting advice you'll ever need. We also have various subscription lengths and options too. So to see our full service list, please go and visit MMAPlay365.com for more information or to sign up today. And let's go, let's break down some fights. In the main event, we've got Thiago Santos versus Glover Teixeira. Thiago Santos is currently the minus 240 favourite. The comeback on Teixeira is plus 200 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the value sits with the underdog in Glover Teixeira at plus 200 for a couple of reasons. One, I think he's a solid fighter with legitimate paths to victory in this fight, so plus 200 does seem a little wide. And two, Teixeira turns up time and time again to fight for your money as a big underdog, so I think this betting line is wide and I think there's value on the underdog here. Now, as for where the betting line moves, honestly I can only see it moving in one direction the closer we get to Saturday night, and I think that'll be money coming in on Teixeira at plus 200. Thiago Santos at minus 240, I just don't think it's a line that's going to get steamed to minus 260, minus 275. I think that would be absolutely ridiculous if I'm being honest, so I think the money is going to continue to come in on Glover, which the current trend is that it's coming in very slowly, and I think that we'll see Glover close at around plus 175 with Thiago Santos dipping below minus 200 come fight night on Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out though, I do think it's a classic case of striker versus grappler here. Obviously Thiago Santos being the striker, Glover Teixeira being the grappler, but listen, both fighters are relatively well-rounded. I do think Glover's more well-rounded. Obviously, Santos' striking is better than Glover's. He's got brutal kicks. He's got power in his hands. He moves better on the feet as well. So those are big advantages for Thiago Santos. But Glover's got decent fundamentals. He's got a good jab. He's got a good 1-2. Again, he doesn't have a ton of movement. His movement's not that elusive, but he can strike. He can hang in there with the best in the division, and he's proved that for many, many years now. And you know, he's also got underrated power. I don't think he's going to knock Thiago Santos out, but I don't think he hits with pillow fists is basically what I'm saying. But on Glover's side, Glover's got good wrestling. His grappling, his Brazilian jiu-jitsu is absolutely legit. And that's where he's going to have his advantages in this fight, because if he can get Thiago Santos down, then he's going to have a lot of success on top of Thiago Santos. I think Santos might be able to get up once, maybe twice, but I feel that the more Glover gets Santos down to the mat, the more he'll be able to work, the harder it'll be for Santos to get back up to his feet. So it is going to be really intriguing to how this fight plays out. For me, it's about how Thiago Santos is inside the cage, how he starts this fight. This is the first time that we've seen Santos inside the cage since he lost that split decision title fight to John Jones, where some people thought that Thiago Santos actually won that fight. But the reason we haven't seen Santos since that fight in that long is he suffered a torn ACL, a torn MCL, PCL and meniscus in that left knee in that title fight against John Jones. So obviously because of that, Thiago Santos got the surgery that he needed and now he's back. So as I mentioned, it depends how Thiago Santos is inside the cage, if he shows any effects from that surgery, because predominantly his kicks are one of his biggest weapons. So to have all those injuries and that surgery all on the same knee, it could be problematic in this fight. I'm not saying that he's not going to be 100%, but as a kicker, having those types of serious injuries definitely poses some question marks and some red flags on Santos. For me, I feel that Santos is going to come out in one of two ways. He's either going to come out quite cagey, no pun intended, and just feel his way into the fight, get any rust out of his system, and just making sure that he's feeling comfortable inside the cage before he starts pushing a hard pace on Glover. But the problem for Thiago Santos in this instance is Glover's used to having to weather a storm against these aggressive, explosive light heavyweights. If he doesn't have a storm to weather against Thiago Santos, the chances are he's probably going to go straight to the well, close the distance, get a body lock and take Thiago Santos down to the mat and start working him. If that happens and he tires Santos out and makes Santos really work on the mat in that first round, Santos might not be able to push that high pace later in the fight, and therefore it would make the fight much easier for Glover Teixeira down the stretch. The other way that Thiago Santos will start this fight is if he comes out hard and fast, as we used to seeing him. If these injuries and the surgery hasn't affected him at all and he's back, he's feeling good, and he just comes out rushing at Glover, then Glover's got to weather a storm. At that point, that's where the fight becomes much closer in regards to who wins, because Thiago Santos at that point could absolutely knock Glover out cold and it'll be over in round one. He holds a ton of power in his hands and his legs, and honestly, if Thiago Santos does deliver that storm in the first round, it might be one of the toughest storms that Glover Teixeira has ever had to weather. However, Glover Teixeira historically has dealt with these storms, has dealt with this style and survived in that first round. So again, if Santos comes out fast, it's not going to be Santos wins and that's it. Glover Teixeira still has a good chance to win this fight. He just has to weather a storm and he has to get through a difficult first round, just like he did in his last fight against Anthony Smith. He dealt with a difficult first round. He turned the tide around at the end of round two and absolutely dominated from there and finished Smith down the stretch. But no matter how Thiago Santos looks, no matter how he comes out in this fight, Glover Teixeira has paths to victory. It's just if Santos comes out hard, fast, and like he hasn't had any effect from the injuries and surgery, it's going to be a little tougher for Glover to win. But if Santos comes out needing to get some rust out of his system, needing to make reads and just make himself feel comfortable using those first few minutes to get himself back inside the cage properly, then for me, Glover Teixeira has an even higher percentage chance of winning the fight, because that allows him to get into this fight much quicker, which will be bad news for Thiago Santos. Because of those two paths to victory, I am going to side with the underdog and I am going to pick Glover Teixeira to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Andrei Arlovski versus Tanner Boser. Tanner Boser's currently the minus 275 favourite. The comeback on Arlovski at plus 235 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the betting line is really fair, if I'm being honest. Minimal value on Tanner Boser for me. He could potentially be minus 300, maybe even minus 320, and I think that would be relatively justified as well. I think this is a good fight for Tanner Boser, and I think it's a good opportunity to get a solid name on his record as well. As for how the betting line moves, as we speak, the money is coming in on Tanner Boser, so if we do see that minus 300 come fight night on Saturday night, I'm not going to be surprised, and that's where I do anticipate this betting line closing. But as for how this fight plays out, as I've mentioned, I think it's a good fight for Tanner Boser. I think he's a fighter that has looked great in the UFC. The only loss has come to Cyril Gane, but Cyril Gane is a dangerous, unbeaten fighter, a fighter that nobody's been able to beat so far. And Boser was also the first fighter to go to a decision with Cyril Gane, so the fact that Boser's been able to get 15 minutes inside the cage against a dangerous Cyril Gane and survive all those dangerous moments, I don't think that does his record any harm whatsoever. Aside from that, Daniel Spitz, Philippe Lins, Rafael Pessoa, all names on his record that he's looked great against. Daniel Spitz was a decision, that was his debut. I think we can give him a pass for that. But knocking Philippe Lins out in round one with that beautiful combination, I think really made Tanner Boser's stock rise. And then that brutal knockout of Rafael Pessoa not long after that fight, it was the next month, really cemented the fact that Boser is one to watch in this heavyweight division. And now he gets a veteran in Andrei Arlovski. We all know what Arlovski's about. He's a fighter at this point that will look to point fight, that will look to try and out-volume you. And for some reason, Andrei Arlovski has the ability to look like the much better fighter in these close fights. And That's one trait that Arlovski carries right now. No matter who he fights, whether they're much worse than him, whether they're much better than him, he's got the ability to make fights close. And obviously that's not a great trait when you're fighting somebody that's not better than you, go into a close decision with those guys. But for the better guys, for the better quality guys, the more dangerous guys, Arlovski's able to stifle that aggression. He's able to stifle that volume and ultimately just make them second guess inside the cage, which makes Arlovski fight a better fight because he's then able to get off on his own shots, put his combinations together himself, stick a jab out, work the low kicks. But in this fight with Tanner Boser, I don't think that Boser is one of those fighters that Arlovski is going to be able to stifle. I don't think the veteran inside Arlovski is going to be able to slow Boser down, to stop him throwing, to stop him mixing things up. And for me, that's where Boser does his best work. He's got a nice jab. He's got brutal low kicks. He'll put combinations together. He'll finish off with low kicks as well, which is something that I really like to see. But ultimately, just mixing the hands and the legs together and creating a fight inside the cage which is dangerous for his opponent, and a fight where he's able to rack up volume just in case he doesn't get the finish. If it goes to a decision, he's going to look like the more active fighter. And for a heavyweight, he moves really well as well. I think Arlovski's going to have his moments in this fight. I don't think that Boser's going to come in here and he's going to whitewash him or knock him out in 30 seconds, but I just don't see a scenario where Andrei Arlovski lands something hard to put Boser down. Boser's got a solid chin for a heavyweight, and I also don't see a scenario where Arlovski outworks Boser over 3 rounds if it goes to a decision as well. Like I say, Boser's one of the best moving heavyweights in the division. He's a smaller heavyweight, which allows for that, and because of that, he can rack up volume. His cardio will hold up as well, and he can just put on a clinic in these types of fights. And I think with Arlovski, he will be landing a jab on Boser. He will be landing a 1-2 on Boser as well, but I just don't think that's going to be enough to halt the forward pressure and the aggression of Boser. I think that Boser could definitely knock Arlovski out in this fight. If he doesn't, though, he's going to outwork Arlovski over 15 minutes. For those 2 reasons, those 2 paths to victory, I'm picking Tanner Boser to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got the return of Raoni Barcelos versus Khalid Taha. Barcelos is currently the -350 favourite. The comeback on Taha at +290 is the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I do think the betting line is relatively fair. I actually think that Barcelos could be comfortably -400, -450 in this spot. So I do think the value is with Barcelos, even though he is at a wide line of -350. As for where the betting line moves, I can only assume that the -350 will get played more than the +290 of Khalid Taha. Taha does obviously have that puncher's chance, which I'll talk about very shortly, but aside from that, Barcelos is just the better fighter, and I feel he's the fighter people would be more comfortable in putting their money on, and therefore more comfortable playing in those parlays, which we all know will increase that betting line come fight night on Saturday night. As for how this fight plays out, though, as I've already just alluded to, Khalid Taha does have a puncher's chance, but I do think, without sounding too harsh, that that's pretty much all he's got in this fight. He's not a bad fighter. He does pack power, and he does throw with combinations in bursts. He can't commit to those huge combinations throughout the entire 15 minutes constantly, because obviously that will be taxing on the cardio. He is a very muscular guy, so he does have to be careful overexerting. But aside from that, Raoni Barcelos is one of the top guys in the division, in my opinion. He's a guy that can do everything. He's a solid striker, and when he is throwing on the feet, he'll mix things up with his hands, with his kicks. He'll throw combinations, left hooks, straight rights, again finishing combinations off with low kicks as well, and everything that Barcelos lands, it just feels like it lands super hard. And one of the good things about Barcelos is his gas tank. So unlike Taha, Barcelos can go hard for 3 rounds knowing that his gas tank's gonna keep up with him, and that's just his striking. The dude can wrestle. He's a good wrestler, a good reactive takedown, good double legs. If he doesn't get the takedown initially, he'll drive through to the cage. On the cage, he'll look to chain submissions together. He'll look for the single leg, go back to a double leg, look to get the body lock, to look for a trip or a drag down to the mat. If he wants to get a fight down to the mat, he's probably going to get that fight down there. And when he does get down to the mat, his jiu-jitsu's legit as well. He knows exactly what he's he's doing on the floor. He doesn't rush positions. He'll wait in a position, land some strikes until that position becomes available. So for example, if he's half on the back of his opponent against the cage, he'll just land some brutal strikes on the opponent until they make a mistake or they create that little bit of extra space for him to sink that second hook in, and he'll take the back and look to submit you. Barcelos for me is, like I've already said, one of the top fighters in the division. I know he stepped in here on short notice. It should have been Jack Shaw, who apparently had visa issues, but short notice or not, I don't think it matters. Barcelos is the better fighter wherever this fight goes. He's more dangerous. If he avoids that punch, that one big connection from Khalid Taha, he'll win this fight. I'm picking Raoni Barcelos to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ian Heinisch versus Brendan Allen. This is probably my favourite fight of the night, and the odds makers have this really close too. It's lined at a -110 pick'em at either side. In regards to where the value is on this betting line, it's one of those fights where if you have got a good read on it, either side's playable, either side can have value if you do have that good read. As for where the betting line's moved, all the money recently has come on Ian Heinisch. He was +110, +115 in places 2 or 3 days ago. Brendan Allen was out at -145 at one point as well, so all the money's coming on Heinisch. It seems to have settled around this pick'em line, and come Saturday night, I don't expect it to move too far from where it is right now. Now, as for how this fight plays out, again, I feel like we've got a bit of a striker versus grappler scenario here, but both fighters are extremely well-rounded. They were both LFA champions as well, which what that tells you is both fighters are battle-tested. Both fighters are extremely well-rounded, good in every facet of MMA, and both fighters just know how to win fights. Of course, they both take losses, but in fights that are close, these LFA champions are fighters that you can trust, and we've got one on either side of the cage here. However, predominantly, you do have Ian Heinisch that does look more of a striker, and then you've got Brendan Allen on the other side that definitely prefers to wrestle and grapple a little bit more in his fight. So it's going to be a really interesting fight to see how it plays out. Now, from Ian Heinisch's perspective, the one thing that I've always found very underrated about his game is his jiu-jitsu. Actually, he's got a wrestling background, but his striking checks out, as I've already spoken about. But the jiu-jitsu, specifically defensively, is something that I feel has always been underrated, and it's something that really does impress me because he doesn't tend to find himself in too many bad positions on the mat if he is taken down, and his ability to stand back up is also really good as well. He did come a little bit unstuck against Shoeface Antonio Carlos Jr. He got taken down in the first round, really struggled to get back up. He lost that first round and then subsequently won the last 2 rounds, winning the fight. So for me, that was quite impressive. In regards to Brendan Allen though, Brendan Allen, although he's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, obviously there is levels, and I don't think he's at the level of Antonio Carlos Jr., but the one thing that Brendan Allen does better than Shoeface is his ability to scramble and his magnet for top position. So we saw Shoeface late in that fight against Ian Heinisch. He got stuck on his back and he couldn't really do anything. Brendan Allen does have some moments like that. He's not perfect down there, but his ability in the scramble and his magnet for top position is just crazy. So I do feel that although Ian Heinisch, as I've mentioned, has underrated defensive Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I think if it hits the mat, Brendan Allen will have the better in exchanges. Even if Ian Heinisch is getting back up to his feet, Brendan Allen's got the ability to create that body lock and remain on his opponent and try and drag them back down, and he's also really good at hopping a back quickly as well. So if Ian Heinisch turns his back against the cage to stand back up, I can see a scenario where Brendan Allen sticks one hook in and then he's just working against the cage, and eventually he will get the position that he wants. On the feet though, if Brendan Allen can't take Ian Heinisch down, I think that's where it's going to get tricky for Brendan Allen, because I think Heinisch has got some decent forward pressure, so's Brendan Allen. I think it'd be a case of them both meeting in the middle, and I think Ian Heinisch just has more pop on his strikes and he's more likely to start piecing Brendan Allen up on the feet opposed to being the other way around. However, the one thing that I do find really interesting for this fight is Brendan Allen's actually been out at Sanford MMA, which, for those that don't know, used to be Hard Knocks 365, and Brendan Allen's actually going to have Henry Hooft in his corner as well. So the fact that Brendan Allen's been out there at a gym that is very kickboxing heavy and does have that mindset around the gym as well, even though you've got good grapplers there like the Burns brothers, etc. I do like the fact that he's been around a lot of high-level strikers and a high-level striking coach that's also going to be in his corner on the night as well. So don't be surprised here if Brendan Allen's striking looks significantly better, and if that's the case, and if he does, I think this fight is going to go the way of Brendan Allen, because if Brendan Allen can at least match Heinisch on the feet and not let Heinisch get off on too many strikes and actually start cracking him back, that's even before we talk about the wrestling and the grappling of Allen. That instantly to me tells me that Allen's got a chance on the feet alone. And then when you start looking at the fact that Allen's going to be looking to take the fight to the mat as and when he can, and the positions that he gets on the mat, his scrambling ability, his magnet for top control, all these things that I've already spoken about, I do start to lean in the way of Brendan Allen in this fight. And one last thing that just really concerns me for Ian Heinisch, and it's something I actually disagree with a lot of people when they talk about Heinisch's cardio and how it's great. He has one of those gas tanks where when he does start to get tired, he can fight through it 100%. You'll never see Ian Heinisch give up on himself or put his hands on his hips or his knees and really starting to suck so much air. But Ian Heinisch does slow down from round to round. He starts off really fast, his movement's great, he's bouncing around in and out of range, but come the second round, come the third round, that movement, that erratic movement really does stop. He becomes a lot more static, a lot more plodding, and I think if Brendan Allen does have a tough first round, I think there's a good chance that he can win the second and the third round as well. I think that there's a possibility Allen could submit and get Heinisch out of there. I wouldn't be shocked. But I think over 3 rounds, I think Allen will be the more active fighter, the fighter that's mixing it up a little bit more. The judges will see the takedowns. And I think overall, from a mixed martial arts aspect, mixing in a little bit of everything, I think the judges will like that a little bit better from Brendan Allen again, should the fight hit the scorecards. Ian Heinisch winning this fight wouldn't shock me. It's lined at a pick'em for a reason. But I do like this fight for Brendan Allen from a stylistic perspective, so I'm picking Brendan Allen to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got another fun fight, stylistically a really good fight as well. We've got Claudia Gadelha versus Yan Xiaonan. Yan Xiaonan is currently the minus 135 favourite. The comeback on Gadelha at plus 115 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this line, I do think the value sits with Yan Xiaonan at this point. I think if it gets ridiculous though, if we start seeing minus 155, minus 160, minus 170, then honestly the plus money on Gadelha at that point would probably be the value side. And as for where the betting line moves come closer to fight night, I honestly think we're going to see this brick wall scenario. So I do think more money will come in on Yan Xiaonan up to maybe minus 145, minus 150. But I think at that point, that'll be the brick wall. And there'll be so much value on Gadelha in some people's perspective that they will start to wager Gadelha, start to get those tickets in on Gadelha, being that Gadelha probably shouldn't be that wide of an underdog. So I think the money will come in on Yan Xiaonan maybe to minus 150. And at that point, people will start betting the other side on Claudia Gadelha, which will ultimately mean that the betting lines will close roughly where they are right about now. As for how this fight plays out though, again, grappler versus striker scenario. The grappler in Claudia Gadelha, she is a good wrestler. She can get fights down to the mat when she's on top. Her jiu-jitsu is high level. She's able to control women on the mat. She's been able to pass. She's been able to finish women on the mat as well and just ultimately be dominant down there. But with Yan Xiaonan, she's a fighter that's absolutely a striker. Very unique as well. We don't really have too many fighters like Yan Xiaonan. She's very aggressive. She comes forward. She throws in tons of combinations, power in those combinations as well. And the cardio checks out with that style, which is something that you don't see too much of when fighters are throwing everything into every shot and putting together long combinations with tons of volume over 15 minutes. For that cardio to hold out is really, really impressive. And I actually think that the cardio is something that's going to drag Yan Xiaonan through this fight and give her a massive edge over Gadelha. The one thing that we've seen from Gadelha in a decline, because let's be honest, she's not the same fighter that she used to be. She's not looking great every time we see her back inside the cage. And when I say great, I mean how she used to be. You know, the great Claudia Gadelha. We don't see that anymore. And she's not looking better each time out either. So unfortunately, these are the signs of a fighter that's declining. Now, the one real issue for Gadelha is not the fact that her skills aren't where they used to be, because I do think that she is still a very skilled fighter, but the big issue for Gadelha is that gas tank and that cardio. She's got one round she's really, really solid. She'll get takedowns, she'll look good, but the more takedowns she shoots, the more tired she gets, and every single fight that we see her, she seems to struggle with that a little bit more each time out, to the point where we don't really see her shooting many takedowns anymore, especially in those final 2 rounds. And that's a big problem for Gadelha because her style is dependent on those takedowns. Now for me, I think she's going to be able to take Xiaonan down in round 1, and I think she might even be able to ride that round out if she doesn't finish her. So that round 1 for Xiaonan is going to be a round that she's probably going to drop, and that she has to be on her P's and Q's. She has to be very aware, don't make any mistakes. If it does get to the point where you have to accept that you're losing that round, just accept that you've lost that round, but still keep working, still make Gadelha work. Don't lie flat on your back, because what that will do for Xiaonan is that will put money in the bank for her in regards to the fact that she's going to make Gadelha work, knowing that she's going to get through that first round. Come the second round, Gadelha is going to be tired. The takedowns aren't going to be as strong. The takedowns aren't going to be as frequent. And at that point, Xiaonan can start implementing her own game, being aggressive, getting in the face of Gadelha and putting strikes on her. I think Xiaonan can hurt Gadelha on the feet as well, so I wouldn't be surprised if she put Gadelha out. I'm not saying it's going to be a one-bomb, but just the accumulation of these hard combinations that Xiaonan throws and the aggression and the pressure that she's going to put on Gadelha, she's got to be mindful that the takedown could be there at any point, but I don't think she has to overthink that. I don't think it has to be one of those things where she feels she can't strike in case she gets taken down, because Gadelha won't be as effective in those final 2 rounds with the takedowns. And just one real instance of visibly seeing Gadelha and what she looks like after that first round, if you go back and watch the Angela Hill fight and look at when they're clinching, Gadelha looks like the stronger woman. Angela Hill is struggling to try and turn Gadelha on the cage. Gadelha is just able to use her strength, use her pressure and push against Angela Hill. Come the second round, they clinch up again. Gadelha again initiates the clinch, but this time Hill is able to turn her. She is able to have more success in that clinch. And for me, instantly just seeing that, that's proof that a lot of Gadelha just gets sucked out of her in that first round. And in the second and third round, she's just not the same fighter physically, from a cardio perspective and from a strength perspective as well. And again, that's going to be detrimental to a fighter that needs takedowns to win the fights. I think Xiaonan's going to drop this round 1, but I think she's going to come faster and harder in round 2 and 3. I think there's a chance she puts Gadelha out, but if she doesn't, I think she'll win on the scorecards. I'm picking Xiaonan to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Giga Chikadze returning again not long after the victory against Omar Morales, and this time he faces the newcomer Jamey Simmons. Giga Chikadze is currently the minus 485 favourite. The comeback on Simmons at plus 385 as the underdog. As for where the value is on this betting line, I don't think that there's too much value, if I'm being honest, because minus 485 for Giga Chikadze after watching tape is absolutely fair, and I respect that betting line. It can't be any lower, because if Giga Chikadze was minus 300, minus 350, he would just get steamed to where it is right about now. But having said that, the betting line is very close to the edge of where I do see any sort of value, with mixed martial arts being a volatile and a violent sport. As for where the betting line moves, I do think we see Giga Chikadze into that minus 500 range, minus 550 come fight night. I think it's a really good stylistic fight for him. I think he's by far the better fighter in every facet as well. So I just think it's way more likely that we see the parlay money coming in on Giga Chikadze than the underdog shot on Jamey Simmons at plus 385. And as for how this fight plays out, I've just alluded to it there. Giga Chikadze by far the better striker. He's more technical, he's more dangerous, he hits harder, his movement's better, he's got more experience inside the cage as well. Jamey Simmons does seem to be a little elusive on the feet. He moves in and out of range in sort of a karate stance at times as well. He does pack some power, but he keeps his hands low, and that's going to be a real issue in this fight with Chikadze. Jamey Simmons can't come into this fight and look as overly confident as what he's done against opponents on the regional scene, because Giga will just put him out. It's as simple as that. But Simmons has got a wrestling background and he does have decent takedowns. However, Giga Chikadze's wrestling defense is getting better, and honestly, I don't see explosive wrestling from Simmons. It's more of, I'll shoot in, make contact, push you against the cage, and then work against the cage to try and take you down. And ultimately, I think if you are going to take Giga Chikadze down, it's probably going to be a blast double in the middle of the octagon, because his fundamentals on his takedown defense are there and they are getting better as well. But even if Jamey Simmons gets Giga Chikadze down, I think that he's good on top for a certain amount of time, but then his cardio just drains. He becomes sloppy. He's been reversed in fights as well against a fighter that also looked completely tired and didn't look on the same level of him in regards to the wrestling and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So to actually see that against regional level fighters, I just don't see where Jamey Simmons is going to pose Giga Chikadze any issues. Obviously, 4-ounce gloves, mixed martial arts, highest level in mixed martial arts in the UFC. There's a chance that he lands one hard punch on Giga and puts him out, but personally, I really don't see it. I think it's a super low percentage outcome probability, and for those reasons, I don't see Giga Chikadze losing this fight. I'm picking Giga Chikadze to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Trevin Giles versus Bevon Lewis. The odds makers are seeing this fight extremely close. We've got both fighters at a -110 pick'em at either side. And as I mentioned earlier with Ian Heinisch and Brendan Allen, I feel it's one of these betting lines that if you do have a good read on the fight, then either side is playable with that good read. As for where the betting lines move, it was actually Bevon Lewis that opened the -135 favourite, so all that money came in on Trevin Giles to make this fight a pick'em. It hasn't moved either too much in the last day or two, so I do think that there might be some fluctuation at some point throughout the rest of the week, but ultimately come Saturday night, I don't think it's going to be too far from where we're sitting right now. As for how the fight plays out though, I do think that this is a fight that's going to predominantly take place on the feet. If anybody's going to look for takedowns, I do think it's going to be Trevin Giles. I think Trevin Giles is the more likely fighter to shoot in a double leg and look to put Lewis on his back, but I don't think that Trevin Giles' wrestling is that prolific. He might be able to get Lewis down, but I don't think it'll be a case of get Lewis down, hold him down for 2 or 3 minutes, and if Lewis gets back up straight away, Trevin Giles will turn relentless with his wrestling. I don't think it'll be that sort of fight. I do think that this fight is going to be won and lost on the feet, and they've both got a really different style. So Bevon Lewis is more about when he's striking, stay at range, throw those front oblique kicks to the knees, jab, 1-2, just use his length and his range on the outside just to pick away at his opponents. He won't always look for the knockout blow, and I don't mind that too much in fighters either, because that tells me that if the knockout's not going to be there for him, which is much harder to get in the UFC, then he's fine just going to a decision and just making sure that he's got more volume on his opponent. But Trevin Giles is a different type of striker. Giles will throw with more power. He'll look to throw more combinations as well. He can be inactive from time to time, though. He can take some moments off in fights, and that's something that I don't like to see. And what I mean by that is he'll just be looking at his opponent and taking some volume from them, but ultimately looking to make reads of when he can burst forwards and throw with heat. And ultimately that's what he does like to do, specifically later in fights. He will wait patiently for his moment, and then he'll burst forward. He'll dart forward, he'll throw 2, 3, 4 punch combinations, hard combinations. If he doesn't knock his opponent out, he'll get back out of range, reset, wait patiently again, and then come back in. And that can look good in some judges' eyes, but in this fight, I just feel more confident that Bevon Lewis is going to look better in the judges' eyes. He has been a little inactive before. In that Darren Stewart fight, it was a bit of a staring contest at times, but I do feel an element of that for Bevon Lewis was the fact that in his previous fight he was dominating Uriah Hall and got knocked out with 1 punch in the 3rd round and ultimately lost the fight. So I do think that he was being very cautious of Darren Stewart because he knew that Darren Stewart had that same sort of power. I think it affected him in that fight because of the Uriah Hall fight, but he's probably got over that by now, and I like the fact that if it does get tough for Bevon Lewis, he can just clinch up, and he's good in the clinch as well. Good elbows, good knees, and he's able to stall there. He's strong. He's able to stall his opponent, run the clock down, do enough for the referee not to split them up. And again, it's just another element that looks good in the judges' eyes. So although I'm not sure which fighter is more dangerous from a finishing perspective, I do feel that if it goes to the judges' scorecards, Bevon Lewis is probably going to have done more in regards to volume and control on the cage as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Bevon Lewis to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got a rebooking. We've got Rogerio de Lima versus Alexander Romanov. These two were supposed to fight just a couple of months ago, but it was de Lima that got the positive COVID-19 result just a couple of hours before they were due to step inside the cage. So that was really disappointing. We've got Alexander Romanov, the -335 favourite, the comeback on Rogerio de Lima at plus 275. Now, what's sickening to me about this betting line is when these guys were due to fight last time, I'd actually had Alexander Romanov bet at a minus 110 pick'em line. So it's sickening to see Romanov up at minus 335 now off that one outstanding performance against a short notice debutant that didn't really look like he matched up with Romanov from a skill set perspective or a stylistic perspective. So it's really disappointing to see Romanov at minus 335 just based off that performance, and I really do wish I could have that minus 110 line back because that had absolute value. As for the value though on this betting line, I do still think that Romanov's got value in parlays. I don't think you can risk too much on him, but there is probably parlay value on Romanov there. As for where the betting line moves, I actually think we see more money coming in on the underdog here in Marcos Rogerio de Lima, because although de Lima stylistically isn't in a great fight here, hence obviously why I bet Romanov last time, but he is dangerous. He is still the better striker in this fight. He's got more power. And when you're talking about these things from a heavyweight perspective, and that heavyweight is plus 275, then I can see why some people would be taking the shot on de Lima at this point. And over the last couple of days, it does look like there has been slight money coming in on de Lima that's pushed him down to plus 275. So I think that current trend continues, but ultimately I think Romanov will get out there at minus 300 on Fight Night on Saturday night. However, as for how the fight plays out, once again, striker versus grappler. We've got the striker in Marcos Rogerio de Lima. His Muay Thai is solid, it's crisp. His low kicks are also a big weapon of his as well. So from a striking toolset, I think Marcos Rogerio de Lima has got a lot of weapons in his arsenal that he can use in this fight whilst the fight is standing. And if he does become successful in this fight striking, then look for him to knock Romanov out, because although Romanov isn't a terrible striker, I just don't think his striking's on the same level as de Lima's. However, I don't think it's going to matter, because the better wrestler, the better grappler in this fight is definitely Romanov. I think all Romanov needs is one takedown at the start of each round the longer the fight goes on. I think if he gets the takedown in the first 20 to 30 seconds in the fight, then that's going to reduce the likelihood and close that window of opportunity for de Lima to land a knockout blow. And I think once de Lima's on his back, I don't think he's getting up from Romanov. De Lima's not so bad when he's on the mat in top control, but when he's on his back, he does look a little lost down there. And Romanov is a big, strong heavyweight that's a good wrestler and a good grappler topside himself. So that one takedown, I think Romanov would lie on de Lima, and I think he would put a lot of strikes in. I think he'll tire de Lima out. There's a potential that he submits him as well, but if de Lima does survive that first round, he's going to be absolutely shattered coming into the second round. And again, the first 20 to 30 seconds, I think at that point, the power of de Lima and his strikes won't be as prominent. I think Romanov will be able to survive that 20 to 30 seconds, get de Lima down again and look to replicate what he did in round one. And if it gets to round three, just rinse and repeat with that game plan, and I think he'll be fine. Like I say, stylistically, I feel that this fight does favour Romanov. I think Romanov can hang a little bit more with de Lima on the feet than what de Lima can do with Romanov on the mat. So for those reasons, I'm picking Alexander Romanov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Darren Elkins versus Eduardo Garagorri. Darren Elkins is currently the minus 230 favourite. The comeback on Garagorri at plus 190 as the underdog. As for where the betting value is on this line, I do feel that there's not too much value at all either side. I think Darren Elkins is rightfully the favourite, but minus 230 at this point in Darren Elkins' career, considering all the damage he's taken and the fact that he's not as aggressive as he used to be, I'm just not so sure that the minus 230 line is something that should be too appealing. However, he should get the job done, so that plus 190 on Garagorri for me is not something that I think many people are going to be rushing to the betting window to lay on him. As for where the betting line moves, I don't think it's going to move too far off from where we're at now. I think if it gets to minus 200, there will be people out there that will lay that on Darren Elkins, but on the same respect, I think if it gets to minus 255, minus 260, I think at that point there's going to be people just thinking, well, this fight's a complete pass. I don't want to bet on Elkins at that price, and I also don't think Garagori's going to win, so that dog money probably isn't going to stand too much of a chance of coming in either. So ultimately, I think that the fight's going to go off roughly where the line's sitting about now. As for how this fight plays out though, Garagori's path to victory here is to keep the fight standing, look to land on Darren Elkins very early on. Garagori is probably going to be the better striker in this fight. I don't think it's going to be light years ahead of Darren Elkins, but I do think Garagori can land on Elkins on the feet for sure. Elkins is super hittable, and I think that Garagori's striking is probably going to hit harder than Elkins, have more of an impact on Elkins than vice versa. For me, Darren Elkins has got to lean on his wrestling here, take Garagori down. We've seen that Garagori can be taken down. We've seen that he can be controlled on the mat. And I think if Elkins does get Garagori down, then his jiu-jitsu is definitely better down there anyway. Elkins is a better wrestler, his top side's better as well. Elkins, for me, has just got to make sure he doesn't take too much damage on the feet, which the irony in that is quite hilarious considering the damage is his nickname and he gets bloodied up every single fight, but he's got to make sure that he doesn't take too much of that. But having said that, even though Garagori's got power, we've seen Elkins time and time again take so much power and he's just so difficult to put away. So the way I see this fight playing out, I think obviously it's going to start on the feet. Garagori's going to get off to a relatively decent start for the first 60 seconds, 2 minutes. I think he's going to land on Darren Elkins. He might even bust him up in that time as well, but I think Elkins will eventually start shooting takedowns. Once the takedowns start, I think Elkins will be able to control Garagori on the mat. I think there's going to be a chance that Elkins finishes Garagori on the mat, but if he doesn't and we get into round 2, then Darren Elkins, again, like I've just said with Romanov, should just rinse and repeat that game plan, take Garagori down and just make sure that you're taking that win, getting your hand raised at the end of the night. If Darren Elkins doesn't shoot takedowns in this fight, I don't think it's a case of, okay, well, he's definitely going to lose, but the fight's going to be much closer than it should be if Elkins doesn't use that clear path to victory in the wrestling and grappling. Ultimately, if it does stay on the feet, I do think Elkins could squeak out a win, even though he's not the better striker from a technical perspective. He's just got that forward pressure, that aggression, that loves to come forward, and judges seem to like that style of fighter. So Elkins could squeak a win out on the feet if he doesn't use his wrestling and grappling, but if he does use his wrestling and grappling, I think that path to victory is quite simple for him. Either way, I think he's got a couple of paths to victory here. He's got more experience, he's been in there with much better fighters and beaten much better fighters than Garagori. I'm picking Darren Elkins to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Max Griffin versus the newcomer Ramiz Brahimaj. Max Griffin's currently the minus 145 favourite to come back on Brahimaj at plus 125 as the underdog. As for where the value sits on this betting line, I do think that now the money's coming on Max Griffin. He opened at minus 195, so with him sitting at minus 145, all that money's coming on Brahimaj. I do think with the lines shortening to where they are now, that the value does sit with Max Griffin. I definitely have some question marks on Ramiz Brahimaj, which I'll touch upon very soon. So for me, with the current lines, the value does sit with Max Griffin. As for where the betting line moves, I actually think that this betting line gets even wider. I do think there's going to be a lot of people that like Brahimaj, that like his style, and I really like him in his style as well. So I think that more money is going to come in on Brahimaj. I think we might see Max Griffin hit the minus 125, minus 120 range come fight night on Saturday night. As for how the fight plays out though, like I say, I do like Brahimaj. I do like his style. I think he's going to be really fun to watch. He's a really fun addition to the UFC, and this is a long time coming as well. But there are definitely some question marks, some red flags on him. So the fact that all 8 of his wins have come by submission, and 7 out of those 8 have come in round 1, with the other one coming in round 2, it does lead me to believe, and tape also shows this as well, what is he going to be like in the UFC fighting much better competition when he can't get his fighter out in round 1 or really in round 2? What is he going to be like? And we've seen on tape that the fights that he's lost is because he couldn't get those finishes in the first round. He becomes too reliant on the takedowns. He becomes too reliant on his grappling. he then starts to slow down a little bit. You can then see from a mentality perspective that he's a little bit depleted mentally because he can't be implementing his game plan all the time. And in the UFC against somebody like Max Griffin, I genuinely see that being a real issue for him, because I don't think he's going to go out there and submit Max Griffin in round 1. I don't think he's going to submit him at the start of round 2 either. So I do see a similar pattern to his losses translating over into the UFC and into this fight specifically. Max Griffin is not an easy fight to take, and if Brahimaj thinks that he's going to come into this fight and take him out in round 1, I think he's in for a rude awakening. I'm not saying it can't happen, but we've not seen Max Griffin taken down and then completely dominated and choked out in round 1 before, and even though Brahimaj is a skilled grappler, this is still his debut, and it's still a huge step up in competition as well. So although I think that he's going to get Max Griffin down in round 1, I think there'll be some sketchy moments in round 1. I think that Griffin will survive that first round. Like I say, he's more experienced. He's been in there with some top guys: Colby Covington, Zaleski dos Santos, Mike Perry, Curtis Millender, Thiago Alves, Alex Morono, Alex Cowboy Oliveira. He's been in there with some good guys in the UFC, and I just don't see Brahimaj coming out there and taking him out in round 1. And if I'm correct and that doesn't happen, what we'll see come the second round is we'll see Griffin come back into the fight. We'll start seeing Griffin land strikes on Brahimaj. We'll start to see Brahimaj slow down. We'll start to see him shooting desperate takedowns. I think at that point, it'll be no problem for Max Griffin to start stuffing those takedowns. It'll be one of those fights that I feel you will see the turning of the fight in that second round, early in the second round, and you'll just start to think, okay, well, this is the point where Griffin's coming on stronger for the rest of the fight and Brahimaj's falling off a cliff a little bit. And I think that if he can't take Brahimaj out, which again is a possibility late for Griffin, if Brahimaj's tired, Griffin can tire as well, but he tends to only tire when he's putting on wrestling clinics. I think that Griffin is going to be able to land some hard strikes on Brahimaj down the stretch, and if he doesn't put him out, I think he'll do enough in the latter half of the second round and the third round to win on the scorecards. I think Max Griffin's got multiple paths to victory here. I think he's the better all-round fighter and the more complete MMA fighter with the experience as well. I'm picking Max Griffin to win this fight. And in the final fight of the breakdown, we've got Gustavo Lopez versus Anthony Birchak. The return of Anthony Birchak. It's supposed to have been Gustavo Lopez versus Felipe Colares. Colares has pulled out, unfortunately. I was really looking forward to that fight as well, a good stylistic fight. But I am glad to see Anthony Birchak back in the UFC after looking great in his last few fights as well. Now, as for the betting line on this fight, unfortunately, there isn't any betting lines out just yet. I'd expect these to drop late Wednesday night. The fight only got announced not so long ago, so that's the reason for that. So I'm going to play oddsmaker here, and actually the betting line for Lopez and Colares was -145 Lopez, +125 Colares. I actually think that we see a very similar line here, maybe -150 for Lopez and +130 for Anthony Birchak, but it's going to be very close to where we're at about now, I think. I feel if it's much wider than that or much shorter than that, then there's going to be some value there on whichever side that affects. But as for how this fight plays out, I actually liked Gustavo Lopez against Felipe Colares, and I like Lopez here against Anthony Birchak as well. But listen, Anthony Birchak is going to be very, very game in this fight. I just wonder, with it being short notice, so short notice, that how much will Anthony Birchak have in that gas tank before he naturally starts tiring? And he's not a fighter that's known to really tire and gas horrifically, so that isn't a shot at his gas tank. It's just the fact that it's just super short notice, and the fact that he hasn't had a full camp for this return to the UFC could have an effect on a gas tank just naturally as a human being. But I think that Gustavo Lopez is going to have some success on the feet here. Gustavo Lopez is explosive. We didn't see it too much against Merab Dvalishvili. That was a short notice fight for Lopez, and also one of the worst short notice fights I think any fighter could possibly have against Merab. But Lopez is actually not just a fun fighter, but a really good fighter too. He's got solid strikes, he's got power in his hands. That knockout of Joey Ruque at Combachi 42. Honestly, if you've not watched it, get yourself onto the tape index at MMAPlay365, load it up. It is one of the worst knockouts I think I've ever seen. It was disgusting. So the power that Lopez possesses And that shot on Joey Ruque didn't even look like it had too much behind it either, which is very, very scary when that sort of thing happens. However, Lopez has got to be careful here with Anthony Birchak, because Birchak is a good grappler. He hops her back really, really fast, and he's got a good rear naked choke. Once he gets you back, he'll usually take you out. So for me, Lopez has got to be very careful. But Lopez's wrestling's decent as well. Again, we didn't see it too much in the Merab fight, and Divalishvili can make anybody look like a bad wrestler, but Lopez has got good wrestling. His ground game's not too bad either. The only downside to Lopez is sometimes his activity can be too patient, where he's taking a little bit of time off and he's not putting in constant volume throughout the fight. But apart from that, I think he's a really solid fighter, and Anthony Birchak, I think, will force the volume out of Lopez. If there's any downtime, then I think Birchak will fill that void and it'll just cause Lopez to engage. Like I say, I think Lopez has got to just mind his P's and Q's when it comes to Birchak looking to tie up with him or take him down. Make sure he's not showing his back too much to Birchak. As long as he can get through any scrambling exchanges, any grappling exchanges, I think he's going to look the better fighter on the feet. I think the longer this fight goes on, I think the gas tank of Lopez will look significantly better. As I've mentioned, short notice fights is just horrible on these athletes, and Anthony Birchak, just being a human being, will naturally, very likely slow down the longer the fight goes on. So I think over 3 rounds, Gustavo Lopez will have more activity. I think Lopez has got more chance of knocking him out. There is a legit path to Anthony Birchak, but for this fight, I'm picking Gustavo Lopez to win the fight. And that's all for this episode of On The Moneyline. I hope you all enjoyed it, and once again guys, I'd appreciate all likes to the video and subscriptions to the MMA Play 365 YouTube channel too. Remember, you can get all the betting advice you'll ever need over at MMAPlay365.com. We cater for long-term gamblers that like to build their own bets and strategies, gamblers that just want to follow exactly what I bet on, and we also cater for you fun gamblers that like the long shot fun parlays, or ACCAs as we call them in the UK. Even if you only want our best value underdog for the event, we have plenty of different packages and subscription options for you guys to choose from, and they're all at very affordable prices too. Just hop on to MMAPlay365.com and see what's best for you. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you at the next event.